Guys, I have to say, we'll go starting now. First of all, show of hands. Well, let me back up. Thank you guys for being here, seriously. Show of hands, how many of you were in my first session? Okay. Oh my gosh, that many. Okay, thank you so much. I asked that because here in my head, so I would say, math is not my strong suit. I would say 90% of you were in the first session, I would say. Can I ask you, just so they can hear us, scream out if you were in the first session? My thinking is this. You know I said that like 80% was going to be new, 20% is repeat? The reality is I look back, it was more like 90-10, and that 10 was essentially like, you know, introduction, how the brain works and stuff. I think I'm going to go ahead and bypass that. And then start right into the new stuff, but that's okay. Yeah. Just because it's so much to be authentic. Thank you. So I do, there might be a couple of things that I back up on or backtrack just for sake of moving forward. So thank you. You all know me. I'm Matt Thomas, 19-year high school teacher. I will say, because I'm going to repeat this, and some of you know why, but I work at Paris Unified School District, Union School District. I keep hearing we're not unified yet. But I have the best coworkers and the best parent liaisons in the business. And again, I'm not repeating that because some of them are sitting in this session now. But I really do. I seriously do. It's amazing. And I love, this is more of a personal thing between me and the 7 of you that are here. I love when family comes and sits on these and supports me. So thank you guys so much. This is really so the first session was like our minds, right? In general, this is how people learn. This is how people do their thing. This one is very specific to multilingual students. And you have to forgive me because I was an ELD teacher for 15 of the 17 years I was teaching. And I say ELD specifically. This is why, oh please come on, we have extra seats. If someone doesn't want to, if you have a seat open next to you, do you mind just kind of putting your hands up? Thank you. And we do have a seat in the back there that has a speaker on it. You can move the speaker for sure. Thank you guys so much. So I will use the term ELD. I want to reference this, so please forgive me. For the 15 years that I taught ELD classes, English Language Development, it was referred to as ELD, ELL, ESL, depending on how it changed. There is a push to now reframe it into multilingual learner. I love that a lot. And you'll know why I love that when I tell this story. So, okay, I'm going to go through and bypass this. I will say this. The QR code will give you this presentation, so different than the last one. And it's also I'm recording the session right here. Just me, it doesn't have you guys, it's just me here. And I'm going to put this session on here too, because I just want you to just sit and enjoy. And then grab whatever pertains to you. And then we talked about synaptic pruning. You're going to probably forget what doesn't pertain to you anyway. And we just have to be open to that. That's synaptic pruning. And so, I'm going to record it for you so you can just sit back, enjoy, go back and watch it. I'll probably have it up in a couple days. I'll link it to this session. So you can just, look at the slides later. I told you that I'm going to reference this a little bit because it'll explain why I love teaching my ELs, my multilingual learners. So I'm going to bypass this. I do want to reiterate how our brain learns. Because to me, this is the biggest influence. Okay, I'm going to say this and we'll see how it comes out. This is kind of the biggest influence, I would say, in life and how we treat others. So if someone goes, why do people act this certain way? It's that. Action, prediction, reaction. How I talked about how the brain learns and the brain makes meaning. So I want to say this. And this is just the scientist in me. So bear with me for a second. When people talk about in education, we use a lot of metaphors. We use a lot of analogies. We create a lot of things. So do you remember when I talked about the observer reflector and the speaker responder? A friend of mine heard it and goes, hey Matt, he goes, what if I'm in both? Is there a third category? Because sometimes I just want to sit and reflect. Other times I want to speak up. And I said, yeah. I said, let me kind of explain the categories. We kind of make up the categories. The brain doesn't really care. The brain doesn't, well, I'm going to categorize you as a speaker responder. That's me as a presenter putting a label on it. When we label things, that's us as people doing it because we like to have categories. Because it makes it easier for our brain to remember things. Our brain likes categories. Every time you experience something, the amygdala goes, is that important enough to remember? If it's not, we forget it, synaptic pruning. If we go, that's pretty important, we remember it and we put it in a category. Now when I say category, that's me calling it a category, not the brain. So please understand, if I'm talking about speaker responder and observer reflector, my friend's like, what if I'm both? Like the category is just something we made up. We all kind of blended with both all throughout the day. Like if I'm at a workshop about neuroscience, neuroeducation, I'm a speaker responder. I'm like, ooh, sorry. Do you ever have students interrupt you when they're talking? It's because they're really excited and motivated and they want to talk. That's a great thing. Maybe not for us as presenters. Because you're like, wait, I need to get through my stuff. And they're always interrupting. But know in the back of your mind that that's actually a very cool thing. It's the students that come to you during lunch and you're like, I need my lunch by myself. Take it as a compliment because they actually feel comfortable being with you. Sometimes the students who are kind of rudest the most to us, that sounds weird. The ones who are rude the most to us, take it as a compliment because they feel comfortable that they can come to you and share those things. I know it doesn't help us. It's still frustrating. You can know everything about all the rules of the brain and things still get frustrating. But at least take it to heart. They're like, hey, my students feel comfortable enough to come to me with these things. But anyway, that's a side point. So the reason I bring that up is even if in education, we like to have levels of things. Hey, there's 7 levels of Kafka's reflection on the 4 levels of the meaning of learning of whatever, right? Those are just made up, created levels. It's very fluid all the time, and the brain's very fluid and it's constantly moving and morphing and brain plasticity and all that. So please understand that. As I talked about though, when it comes to learning and making meaning, again, that's a metaphor. The brain doesn't understand a learning versus meaning thing. That's an us thing. There are 3 things to focus on: action, prediction, reaction. Everything everybody does in their life is based on that. And that can include neurodivergent population. Because somewhere, somehow, if a person is either attention deficit, hyperfocus, Tourette's, something like that, and they get stuck on something, they got it somewhere, and they're just repeating action. Like it hits to all type of learners. Action, prediction, reaction. When an action happens, our brain categorizes that action, saves it away for later. So if you meet someone, never met him for the first time, right? So let's say, here, I will humbly say thank you so much. For many of you, it was the first time you came to my session. How many of you saw me speak before? Just show of hands, just for my own ego. Oh, thank you. Oh my God, is that many? Thank you. So if you never saw me before, and you came in this morning, and I'm like a jerk, whatever, like dull, whatever it is. The prediction is, that guy's doing another session. No, thank you. Because your brain tells you, it's not going to go well, you're not going to like it, etc. And then it tells your body how to react. And it sends you a combination of neuromodulators, of chemicals, and it makes you feel a certain way. We interpret that as feelings. Your best friend makes you feel good because you have great relationships with your best friend, and every time you're with your best friend, great things happen. And that doesn't mean struggle doesn't happen. That just means, you feel it's very much a benefit being with that person. And so our students and our kids feel the same way, so we want to always try to support the positivity of that. Anyway, that answers why people do what they do. Why some people are always negative. If you're always a negative person, you're living in this perpetual loop of action, prediction, reaction. If you're more of a positive person, that's just kind of action, prediction, it's just kind of how your life is. I just want to reiterate that because of how powerful it is and how much power we do have of our students. We can influence them greatly by how we treat them. They also, if you guys might have somebody, how many of you, let's be real, let's be real. How many of you know that you're a favorite teacher of some of your students? They're your favorite teacher. Okay, awesome, thank you. That's amazing. Guys, can we round of applause for everybody? Yeah, that's amazing. And it's not wrong to know that you're a favorite teacher, because when we're talking about positive reinforcement, we then need to remind ourselves hey, I'm a favorite teacher of that guy because of what I do. I need to start repeating that and make sure I keep that going. So the reason I say that is because if we try to act as great as we can for all of our students and support them in any way we can, they're going to know that about us. And they're going to keep coming to us. And even when they're in classes that they don't care for, with teachers that they don't care for coming from a household that they don't care for, because they're raised in a situation that they don't care for, that they had no control over, they can come to you because every time they come to you, the action, they think of how you made them feel in class, and their body reacts to that, and it's usually more comfortable. Please feel free, if there's a speaker on it, take the speaker down. There's a speaker back there. Feel free to take it off. And awesome, thank you. If there's any open seats, do you mind just kind of sharing and letting people know? Thank you guys so much. So I just want to reiterate that we have the power, we do, to influence how people see us. And I go back to this. If you have a challenging student, let's be real. Don't think every student's going to come and sit at the desk with a pencil, ready to go. But if you have a challenging student that maybe you've written 3 referrals on all year, I can virtually guarantee that other teachers have written 10 referrals on that student. Students will naturally treat you or give back the way you treat them. It may not be on equal level, but if you have a student that has such a difficult background, and you are treating that, doesn't mean you got to be firm but fair, right? So when I say you got to treat them respectfully, but at the same time, have the norms of your class and the expectations. But when they know you're treating them a certain way, they're going to come up to that. Now, they may not come up to here within a week, but if they're here with other teachers, they're going to raise up to you. They're going to treat you well. So sorry, I know I'm reiterating that, but I want to make sure that's very, very clear because it sets up so many different things. Now let's go into the multilingual learner's brain. So I'm going to be real with you guys because I saw you an hour and a half ago. So I feel like we know each other really well now. So I'm going to be real with you. Plus, I'm a big believer in authenticity. I don't re-say theory. I like to speak from things that I've experienced because then it's real. Then you know that it's authentic. So I'm going to be real with you. My first year teaching, I was teaching what they used to call at-risk students, now at-promise students. And I did well with the students, and mainly it was because I wasn't given a curriculum. And so I walked in, I was supposed to teach linguistics. Do you guys remember linguistics? Okay, all right. So I was supposed to teach that. I didn't have the curriculum, I didn't know what it was. I was told second semester that I was supposed to teach these students. The students did really well. I co-taught. They loved my class, did well, defined well, however you want. The algebra teacher, they hated that guy because he was a jerk. I think he's a cool guy, but in class he changes, right? So, my second year, my principal, true story, my assistant principal said, Matt, can you teach EL for me? And I'm like, sure. I've never taught it before. And he goes, no problem. This was EL 3 and 4 when we combined them. He said, no problem. As long as they don't kill each other. No, that's how it works. As long as they don't kill each other, you're doing a good job. I'm not making that up. That's what he said. Wow. And this is why he said it. So the EL population at my school was the highest, I want to make sure I say this right, the highest referral rate per demographic. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the highest referral rate per demographic. The teacher was writing them referrals left and right. The teacher hated teaching the ELs. The students hated learning from him. He stayed the EL teacher because he liked to be left alone. Remember that back in the day? When you're like, okay, you're the EL teacher, okay, do your thing. He liked that. No one bothered him. And so he kept teaching it. They asked me to take over. True story. 55 students my first day. They were sitting on the counters. I'm like, this is so cool. And I went in. Now, he told me how bad they were. And as a teacher, sending me like this, when you get a new student, you don't want to hear the previous things. Let me tell you about him. No, don't tell me. I don't want to know. But the EL teacher was telling me how bad these students were. And so I went in first day and I went, this is awesome. This is rowdy, but this is great. These guys are so good. And they split them up. Doesn't matter. The point of the story is the first year I taught ELD, they didn't give me a curriculum. I didn't know what to teach. I was teaching 9th grade English at the time, so I just did what any other teacher would do. I taught them the 9th grade curriculum. That's what I had, the textbooks. So I'm like, all right. And so I taught my EL class, EL 3 and 4, all year using the same curriculum, the same way that I did my other classes. And so that first year, if you guys remember the STAR test scores, my students went up 56 points in their STAR test score. It was the only class in the entire district that had an increase. My students increased 40% on the CASI scores compared to the previous year, if you remember the CASI test. It's the only increase in the district. My vice principal, I was a second year teacher, my vice principal said, Matt, your scores saved our school. I didn't know what that meant. I still don't, but I like that she said it. So I remembered that quote. Synaptic printing, right? We just remember what's valuable to us. Here's the thing, and the only thing I did is I taught out of ignorance. I didn't know I was supposed to teach them a specific curriculum, so I taught them like everybody else. Did I make the information more accessible? Yeah, but I do that with every student, right? A 9th grade teacher is so powerful, I don't care what they came in with. I'm going to take them where I want them to be. I don't even give them that pre-year assessment tests we're supposed to give in 9th grade. I don't care, because I don't know, I had no control what teacher they had before, what they came in. I had no control over that. I have control over me, where they are, and where I can get them. So I taught my ELs that way. There's a reason for this story, I swear to you, and it's gonna build up. I swear there's a reason for this story. So, his perception of what EL students can do, totally different than my perception. Because I didn't know any better. But that was a good thing. I taught him like everybody else. And so when people say my ELs can't do that, I go, no, they can. And they go, that's your opinion. No, that's science. Our students, I'm going to refer to ELs, but it's anybody. It refers to anybody. Unless there's a developmental issue. I want to make sure that's clear. Our students can do anything we want them to do as long as we make it accessible to them. And you can define that as scaffolding. You can call it whatever you want. Don't dumb it down. I'm not calling it dumb it down at all. So I'm going to stand over here because I'm probably right in front of the camera there. I'm not going to say dumb it down. Don't dumb it down at all. Make it more accessible. Don't even simplify it. Make it more accessible. And so same material, and I swear to you, as a scientist, I will tell you, our students can learn anything we want as long as we make it accessible. So be careful of the perception that education has put on our multilingual learners. Because we're told a lot in sessions, and we're not told explicitly what they can or can't do, but it's kind of framed a certain way. Well, you need to do this, and they need to do that, and they can't do this yet, and they can't do that yet. Yeah, they can. Some of the best teachers are the ones that come in, the first or second year teachers coming in. Please, come on, we've got some seats around. Thank you. Not knowing like what they're supposed to teach, because they teach them like everybody else. So, please, the perception of ELs, being a multilingual learner is a benefit, not a deficit. I cannot speak 2 languages. My wife can speak 5. And I'm going to share that. There'll be stories today. There's a reason for these, I swear to you. So, what is a multilingual learner? Here's the thing about education. We tend to label stuff because we kind of have to. Mention how, you know how I mentioned like test scores are not accurate indicators of IQ? They're not accurate indicators of long-term success and happiness, but they're easy ways to be able to, look at test scores from like one school to the next, one demographic to the next. Imagine this, if your sons and daughters or your students are multilingual learners that are A+ students in their home country with their native language, but they come to the US and they don't have the language yet, and I'm going to talk about how challenging it is even when they have the language. They are not going to accurately score. We're not going to be able to get accurate information on those students. But that's how our test system is set up. So that's here nor there, right? That's not something you and I can control. But we can control our perception. So, what's a multilingual learner? There are 34 official definitions in the US. Most of them are pretty similar. I'm going to be fair about that. They're most pretty similar. I have a link here to the individual state ones if you're ever bored and you want to look at them. But educators tend to judge ELs based on what they've heard and what they've experienced, what their mindset is. So we have to be careful as teachers, as parents. I'm going to say this so respectfully. So this was a friend of mine, and he wanted to go on and do. He wasn't sure what he wanted to go on to do, but he knew he didn't want to He didn't want to take over his uncle's landscape business essentially. And his mother told him, what else are you going to do? And so his parents kind of put their expectations on him. He went on, this is my best friend from junior high, he went on to be one of the most powerful people in law enforcement in San Diego. Because he's like, I'm going to do what I want to do. And so we sometimes tend to label, judge our ELs, put them in a certain category, tell them what we can and can't do, even in our own family. We do that sometimes. And we're going to talk about stereotype threat. How many of you teach ERWC? Anyone here teach ERWC? Okay, cool. All right, for the one of you shaking. Okay, cool. All right, so you might know this. There is an article in the ERWC platform, it might still be there, called Stereotype Threat. And it talks about how studies have suggested, I will say too as a researcher, studies never prove, they suggest. I don't even like to say studies show, because that's not always the case. Studies show with 60% accuracy, well then 40% it doesn't. So I always like to say suggest. Studies suggest that if a person hears their stereotype, it's much easier to fulfill that stereotype. So the examples they use in the class, or in the document, is they use a math class, and if you're taking the test, and it's like, okay, there's a stereotype. I never knew this because I'm not a math person. Apparently, there's a stereotype that men do better on math than women do. My wife's a math teacher, and when I said that, I'm like, huh? And she's like, huh? But there's a stereotype. That's what the article says. And so by saying, hey, women, it's challenging to do this math test, but men, you should be fine, the scores plummet because people are now aware of a stereotype. So sometimes in our culture, sometimes in our classes, sometimes with our students, even being aware of stereotypes will kind of influence them to go down that path. I will say this, when I taught my ELD students, so I used to own a business, I told you that before. In my project, one of my projects is my business project in my class, where we do a lot of contract writing. I have the students create a business, they write a problem solution thing, they write a proposal, they create a website, then they do a speech infomercial, like selling their product. It's like a 1 month thing, ties into a bunch of English stuff. I do that with all my EL students as well. And people are surprised, like, wow, you do it with your ELD class? Yeah, why not? And then I promise you, so far, I've had at least 12 people open their businesses once they graduated high school. I think there's 51% of all people have started a business at some point. Currently, there's 16% of all people in the U.S. own a business, yet we don't teach entrepreneurship in school. Dude, we should, totally. That's why I do it in my class. My first year teaching this, I was talking about owning, like how you can sell T-shirts for buy T-shirts for $5, print it, and sell it for 20. One of my students afterwards said, "Hey, Mr. Thomas, I think I'm gonna do that." I'm like, "Okay." He goes, "No, seriously, I think I will." He did his T-shirt company. Within 2 years, he got bought out by Active for over $1 million. And this was my 11th grader at the time. He would have been a senior, 1 year graduated. So this project produced a millionaire, in 2 years. And countless people who have opened their shops because of that. My point is, our students can learn anything as long as we make it accessible. And we want to try to be aware of a perception that people have of multilingual learners. And sometimes education perpetuates that perception as well, or promotes that perception. So here is my definition of a multilingual learner. A student who's going through everything that any other typical teenager or student is going through. But at the same time can be struggling to be heard and understood in a language that they were never taught naturally. We're going to talk about that and what it does in the brain. Who also doesn't want to be judged or labeled. Hey, you're in an ELD 3 class. What does that mean? It means you're not advanced, you're more intermediate, and we're more trying to push you from beginner to newcomer. What? Huh? We're labeling you is what I'm saying. How many of our EL students have difficulties with exiting out with the test, right? The LPAC, right? And then if you look at the test, you're like, dude, that's a tough test. Because of what they're expecting, that's a tough test. So for you that do the LPAC and you're like, what? You're a fluent English speaker, why are you still taking the test? Right? There's an issue with that. Anyway, so we as educators and as parents too, because we have to understand, we hear it from education. Your son got a 2 on the LPAC. What does that mean? That means they need to work more on their English. Be specific. What does that mean? It means they didn't really care for the test too much because they've probably taken it 6 or 7 times, and it's not the most efficient thing to do. And we're the teachers, we have them in class, so we should probably have a better say on if they should reclassify. But again, that's not an us thing. That's something else. All we can do is control what we do in our classroom. So ask yourself, if students are having an issue, is it a language thing or is it a teenage thing? Because I mentioned about textbook before. I get this question a lot. Matt, my EL students are bored, I'm bored, they don't talk in class, and I go, okay, how's your curriculum? And they go, it's boring. And I'm like, there you go. Because with our students, if our non-EL students are bored in class, we go to the curriculum. With the EL, why would it be any different? Right? Our EL students have 2 English classes, and usually 2 separate classes. We need to, just the same as any other student, get them interested, get them having fun, etc., etc. That's beside the point. That's stuff you already know. Let's get to the brain stuff. So the reason I'm very, very motivated or adamant about EL students is because of my wife. So my wife's Filipino. I always say she's legit Filipino. Like, she came out to the U.S. when she was 27, 28. So she's not born here from Filipino parents. Like, she's born and raised. I was so blessed that she somehow followed me to the U.S. but it's so cool. But I convinced her to come over here. She speaks 5 languages. She has 2 degrees. She has a computer science degree and said, I don't want to do computer science, I'm going to teach math. So she self-taught herself to pass the math CSAT test, which is known to be the most difficult test. I bring that up because she's a hard worker. Here's the thing. English is her first language. Because in the Philippines, they do, she's Bisayan. Where'd my kababayan at? You Filipino, bro? Oh, yes, thank you. Awesome. The 3, 4, yeah, thank you so much. So you'll get this. So she speaks Bisayan, she speaks Tagalog, she speaks English because they teach it in class, and she has 2 other dialects. So technically 3 languages and 2 dialects. She has a beautiful, strong accent. There's a reason I tell you that. And here's the thing. She went to get her teaching credential at National. It doesn't matter where, I should say National, because it could have happened at any school. And she has a heavy accent. And so her professor the first day was like, well, you have a strong accent. Maybe you should go to the writing lab. Wow. Now, my wife is one of the smartest people I know. Without a doubt, the hardest person I know. If you know the Philippines, if you're from the Philippines, she is in a very remote, she grew up in a remote province. She lived in a grass hut for years. Years? My voice cracked. Until she got a job at a cement company. She could finally afford cement for her family. Now they have a cement house. Point is, she grew up with very little, a lot of struggle, but love and family from her, love from her family and so on and support. But so she is a strong, hardworking person. Her teacher said, you might want to go to the writing lab because you obviously don't, English isn't your first language. And my wife's like, yes, it is, kind of. I mean, they at the same time. She goes to the writing lab. The thing about Tagalog is they don't use articles. Right? In the U.S., in English, we use articles. Right? So we might say, go brush your teeth, or not your teeth, like go to the store. Right? She might say, go to store. So a tutor said, oh, you need to really work on your writing. She doesn't. I'm an English teacher. She doesn't need to work on her writing. Her writing's good. But in her mind, she's crushed. Because she is the smartest, hardest worker that I know. She's an A student. That hurts her to the core when she's not good at something. That, to this day, that was 17 years ago. To this day, she always goes, oh, you're so lucky that you're a good writer. I'm like, you're a great writer too. Oh, she has me look at her stuff. I'm like, you're fine. 17 years because of one person's ignorance impacted how she feels about herself. Because her having a heavy, beautiful accent was highlighted. And we think about that when we highlight our EL students that way. For however you want to say it, we label it, we highlight it, and that could impact how they feel about themselves. So please be aware of personal perceptions of our EL students. Don't let that impact your belief of what they can and can't accomplish. And always remember, multilingual learners are children first. So everything that applies to everybody else applies to them as well. So let's explain the child's mind. This is why you're here, essentially. If I'm real, this is why you're here today. Let's look at that. So we have to understand a couple things before moving forward. We have to understand the nose of navigating a children's mind. Quite honestly, now I was going to say this is also adult mind, but it's not. I misspoke. So if you remember these 4 things, frontal lobe and amygdala, those are those 2. Let's talk about that. The frontal lobe is responsible for planning, analysis, organization, self-monitoring. Like if someone's angry and they keep going, like, dude, just stop. Like, I can't. Self-monitoring. Initiating something, like, I want to get started with that. That's the frontal lobe. All of those things, long-term consequences. Remember the question like, hey, teenagers don't, they never think about long-term consequences. Well, because their frontal lobe doesn't mature until, I said mid-20s, honestly it's more like late 20s. Late 20s, early 30s. That's why, so analysis is one of the things. That's why if you're like me, when you went back to college when you're 28, college was a lot easier than high school was. Because the analysis part of your brain is fully developed. Anyone else? I see the head. Anyone else had to say, okay, all right, so that's why college is easier when you take a few years off. The frontal lobe. Here's the thing, though. The amygdala, which, okay, I'm going to say regulates emotions, kinda, because in science, that's such a general term. It kinda does, but it doesn't necessarily. The brain is not divided in a way that's like, this controls that controls that. Some things, for sure. But they all rely on each other, without a doubt. One thing that the amygdala is really responsible on is focusing on new events. And remembering new events, remembering special events. If things are not special, the amygdala is like, no, just synaptic pruning. Just forget it, delete it, you don't need. That's why we don't remember everything in our life. Though there are some people that can, but that's beside the point. Regulate, because one of you is like, my uncle, my cousin. I'm like, I know, I'm not talking about those people. So The amygdala, though, it does help with regulating emotions. Define regulate however you want. But it does help with that. And it matures around 17 years old. So when you have people that are trying to organize and plan and analyze situations and talk themselves out of situations, down from situations, analyze what's going on in their life, using a part of the brain that doesn't mature till the 30s, with the help of an emotional part, not the emotional part, an emotional part of the brain that matures at 17, you've got emotion doing this, and you've got analysis and, common sense here. Can you see now why sometimes our students fly off the handles? Sometimes they don't get it yet, because it starts to balance out when we're in our 30s. So that explains a lot. Like, why do they seem like they can't, don't... Okay, if you ask your teenager, dude, what were you thinking? And they go, I don't know. That's a very valid reason. Please don't get mad at them. It is. They don't know. It's frustrating for us because we want them to know. But I always say this. My job as a teacher is to take my teenagers and make them great adults. I can't be mad when they're not there yet. Because then they've mastered the job. As a 9th grade teacher, you don't get this. Oh, my students are so frustrating. We teach, right? That's what our job is. And so so keep that in mind. Knowing that is going to really help add on to what we know about EL learners. Synaptic pruning, I mentioned, if our brain doesn't find it very valuable, it's going to delete the information. That's one of the reasons why math and vocabulary out of context is so difficult to do. Like, I gave my students 20 words on Monday and reviewed it once or twice and then test on Friday. The brain's not going to remember. Okay, for people who have college degrees, right? How much did we study in college? And yet we don't remember 99% of what we learned. Synaptic pruning. So, the final thing that I did in red was dopamine. I already talked about dopamine a little bit. It was more like my point to say I talked about it before. But if you don't have dopamine in your life, if you don't have something exciting in your life to look forward to, including not being fulfilled. People that are in a job that they don't feel fulfilled in, it can cause depression because there's too little dopamine. This is a side point, I wasn't planning on saying this, but you guys, so we have what's called memory markers. And if you notice, we tend to base time off memories. Like, we tend to now reference COVID a lot. How long did I have that for? Okay, when was COVID? And then I got that car a year later. Yeah, about 4 years. Our memory markers are when we have kids, when we get married, when we buy a house. If you've noticed, there's a lot of exciting things that happen in our lives up until we get our career and our house. And then we tend to coast for 10 or 15 years. And then we go like, wow, not a lot's going on in our life. Probably not, because we don't have a lot of memory markers. Then people get depressed because they don't have things to look forward to. It's just something to be aware of, right? And so I just mentioned dopamine. But with kids, it's like that too. If you have teenagers or our EL students that don't feel like they're accomplishing things, they don't feel like they can do what they want to do. I want to be a doctor, but I can't because of whatever. Story, wasn't expecting to tell you, but true story. I had a student the first year, her name was Lorena, EL student. She had the same math teacher and me both had Lorena as students. I saw the math teacher and I went, oh my gosh, you have Lorena too? Lorena's awesome. She wants to be a doctor. And this math teacher goes, Matt, she goes, you got to stop being so optimistic about your students. I'm like, what? And she goes, Lorena has a C- in my geometry class. Doctors are A students. Lorena's not an A student. Doctors are from birth, born being an A student. I'm like, how does that work? So, here's the thing. And now the teacher doesn't work with me anymore. She moved years later. Okay. Lorena, last I heard, was in medical school. So suck it, geometry teacher. But so we have to keep that in mind too. Anyway, I want to reference the looking glass. Okay, so this is where we get into the actual mind stuff. All right, so when we're babies, infants, we aren't even aware of who we are. Right? We're infants. Between the ages of 2 to 6, we start to be aware of who we are. 7 to 9, we start to be aware. Now I'm generalizing this. This isn't like as soon as someone turns 7, generally. Because remember, we create the categories, so I want to make sure that's clear. The brain is fluid. 7 to 9, we are aware that others see us, but we don't care. Like I could be like, ooh, right? And I don't care if you laugh at me or whatever. Because I'm 7 to 9, I'm a kid still. Here's the thing, between 9 to 14, we begin to think, we know that people see us, But now we begin to kind of think about how we're seen by others. And we start to go, oh, people kind of judge me, and oh, when I do something, it gets a certain reaction. And now we start to expect that. Remember, action, prediction, reaction. And teenagers overestimate how much that happens. Because again, the frontal lobe isn't fully developed yet. And so we this is the age, this is the tough age, that we start to be aware of people looking at us and judging us, and we start to think about how we look, and we overestimate it, because our frontal lobe isn't fully developed. And we have this imaginary audience. Like, oh, everyone thought that my outfit looked terrible. No, maybe like one person said it, and then you think everyone thinks it. But remember, 10 to 14. I was afraid, like, what if I said, like, hey Siri, like, what's going to happen to people's phones? Right, anyway, so here's the thing. Now we go, oh, that's terrible. It gets worse with adulthood. It does. I'm not even kidding. Like, okay, so my wife's amazing. There's no but. Like, that's it. My wife's amazing, period. She comes to me and she's like, how does my outfit look? I'm like, you make the outfit look great. And she's like, I'm going to go change it. I went, no. She comes in with another outfit. How's my outfit? I'm like, that's amazing. She's like, I'm going to go change it. But the thing is, it gets worse with adulthood. Right? I'm going to use Facebook because this is just my experience with it. How many friends, I'm not saying ours, I'm just saying, people put stuff on Facebook to show their, perfect life, their perfect vacation, their perfect this, their perfect that. Sometimes, my wife and her friends, they'll outdo each other. My wife doesn't like that because they like, oh, this person outdoes this and this person down. Look at my great new car or whatever. Because it gets worse with adulthood, unfortunately. And so just being aware of that is a very powerful thing. It's important for our students, all of our students, to learn the right place, right time. Right? Like, right place, right time to do this. Like sometimes speaking out, like, hey guys, I'm talking, not the right place, time to talk. But when you're working independently, feel free to. So I just added that in because as they're going through this, we want to make sure we focus on that as well. But now it answers the question, why do people care about how others view them? It starts at age 10. Teenagers have a difficult time analyzing it or balancing it out because their frontal lobe's not there yet. But it does tend to get worse with adulthood until you just go, you know what, I'm done. Plasticity, right? Our brain can adjust and move. Like, I'm not worried about that anymore. So, why do our students seem to talk back? This reference, so if people go, oh, teenagers always talk back. No, they're modeling adult behavior. And that doesn't seem to be rude. I don't mean it as a rude thing. Not at all. Because when adults are very matter of fact. Right? When I'm talking about, I'm trying to think of a great example. I wish I had one. So like, okay, I'll say this a lot in my house. I'm like, 1 second. Like, hey, honey, my wife will be like, can you grab this? Yeah, 1 second. My daughter says that now. But my daughter's 7. When she says it, her tone's a little bit off. Because she's 7. 1 second. That sounds different than, 1 second. Tone. But she's 7. And I go, she gets that from me. Right? So now I talk about tone. Oh, hey, baby, when you say that, can you just adjust the tone a little bit to a 7-year-old? But it's important, right? Because she's going to grow up with that. So I adjust. So when she goes, 1 second, that's different than 1 second. So think of, again, I wish I had a great example. Think of what you say in your house. Your kids are probably going to repeat it, but tone is so important. And so there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, when you said that, don't use that tone. That's now you're emphasizing tone. Be like, hey, when you say that, do you mind adjusting a little bit? And explain to them. Kids want to know. It sounds rude when you do it. You're not being rude, but it just sounds like, can you adjust, et cetera, et cetera. So when teenagers especially seem that they're talking back or yelling back at a parent, let's be real. Maybe the parent talks to the students that way. Because as adults, we're very matter of fact. We talk to each other like this. Kids go, oh my gosh, let's play, right? So when they see us all day, they're going to talk like us. And if they're not at the stage to talk like us, then it's gonna seem out of place. I already used that example, so I'm going to skip that there. So yeah, look at how adults talk to each other. Sometimes we don't talk to each other very politely, especially if we're at work. We're more matter of fact. So if kids seem like they're talking back, They don't mean to. Some do. I'm not going to, don't get me wrong. Like sometimes a student will be like, I need to say this because it hurts. It'll hurt them. Like kids do that. And we need to understand it's the frontal lobe and the kind of guide and redirect and teachable moment. But oftentimes if children seem like they're talking back to us, they're just modeling, and they don't mean to be rude, they're just modeling what they see. So, all right, so are teenagers risk takers? Right? Oh, they're always taking risks. No, the studies show that teenagers do not take any more risks than adults do, except for between the ages of 12 and 14, they are more influenced by what their friends say. Oftentimes it's because they're not getting the answers from their parents. That's just my presumption. That's how I interpret it. And so kids, between the ages of 12 and 14, will be influenced by, they will care what their friends think about them. We looked at that already. And they will be influenced by that. So as an adult, please understand that. And try to make sure you're the biggest influence in your teenage life, or teenager's life there. So let's get into the multilingual right now. How second languages are learned. This is key to where we can get, remember I mentioned like you have the smartest student in the world in their native language, and then come and speak English, and they're learning English, and the test scores don't reflect their true intelligence. Let's look at this. So, first languages are learned in the Broca's and the Wernicke areas. That means nothing to us. The one thing that I get, this is just me talking as a neuroeducator. I go to like neuroscience conferences, and they're like, let's identify the frontal lobe. I'm like, how does that help a teacher on Tuesday? Let's identify where the morphine comes from. That does nothing for teaching little Johnny to read on third. Some things we just don't need. So Broca's area, Wernicke area, that's how first language acquisition is done. Great, we don't need that. That doesn't help us. The Broca's area is how is speech production, is talking. The Wernicke area is how we can language comprehension, understanding how these sounds become this language. Great. That's natural. That's how we all learn our first language. When we speak in our first language, our brain highlights there. Again, that does nothing for us. This is what does it for us as teachers. Second languages use more working memory when we learn the language. Which means, after the age of 7-ish, again, nothing's set in stone, it's fluid. A second language is memorized as words and phrases, no matter how fluent you get in it. Which means, if I'm taking a Spanish class, and my professor says, hola, and I'm like, and they say, hola means hello. I go, oh, yeah, hola, hello. Remember earlier I talked about how we should root the information so it lasts longer? Hola, hello. Oh, I know hello in English. Hola in Spanish. Yay, hola. And then, ¿cómo estás? Sorry, my terrible accent. And I'm like, ¿cómo estás? I memorize that means, how are you? If I were speaking Tagalog, it'd be, ¿cómo está? It'd be, ikaw, ¿cómo está? Et cetera, et cetera. Sorry, my Filipino friends. I'm just blanking on every Filipino phrase that I learned. The point is, we learn memorized words and phrases. I, as a second language learner, know when someone says, hola, I need to now repeat this phrase. If I don't have that memorized word or phrase, I'm lost. Does that make sense, how we learn second languages? Okay, no matter how fluent you are, the 7 of you know Charles Tippy. Sorry, I'm addressing my family, my coworkers here. He knows Spanish. He's a Spanish teacher. He's a co-worker of mine, a Spanish teacher. He didn't grow up learning Spanish, though. I don't think so. At least it's the second language for him. For the rest of his life, no matter how fluent he is, he's speaking in a memorized word or phrase. Even no matter how good he is. If you don't know, that being said, it's a second language. If you don't have that phrase memorized, you'll never be able to answer the question. That's our second language learners who are reclassified. Because if they've never heard the words before, they won't be able to answer it. It's not their true language. And so the reason that's important to know is there are questions that are way more difficult for our multilingual learners to answer than others. And whenever you see an underlying link, it's videos that I did before on that. Please be kind. Some of them I did during COVID. So I've got COVID hair. Just again, and it's very like amateurish. Because that was my role back in COVID. I was the PD coordinator at my school. So these are links to videos you can watch where I get more in depth with it. But for our multilingual learners, it's easier for them to answer what and where questions. What's the capital of New York? Because that's a memorized phrase. They can memorize that. What's the definition of mitosis? I don't know the definition of mitosis, but I put that up there. But that's a memorized phrase that they can memorize. And they can repeat back. The more challenging questions are how and why. So, what do you think of Daisy and her affair with Gatsby and blah, 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 Tom or whatever for English teachers? And so our multilingual learners can like memorize a phrase like, I think it was bad, whatever how you say it. Okay, why do you think that? Oh. Now it's a question that's not a memorized word or phrase. How did you get to that conclusion? Oh, I'm going to need some time. And as a teacher, I go ahead. I talked about observer reflectors. I don't say, go ahead, I'll come back in 2 minutes. No, that's a, go ahead, I'll ask you tomorrow. So please understand, as a teacher, you're going to come across like why is it easier for our multilinguals to answer certain questions than others? This is really why. And so what we should do, and don't steer away from these. No, we need to challenge our students. We need to get them practice at doing this. That's when you say, here's the question I'm going to ask you. Take some time to reflect on it. Come up with your answer. Give them translation tools. Right? Model good writing. Let them use Google Translate. Let them use translation tools. There's nothing wrong with that because we're supporting our students, right? So anything that students will have to construct, okay, if a student has to construct the answer in their native language, when we ask our students questions, they may know the answer. But we're asking them to now translate it to English. In a situation where they don't have all the words, and they may not even have the words in their native language. So we may not always get the response from our students that they want to give us. There's over 170,000 words in English. There's half that in Spanish. In Tagalog, there's 30,000 Filipino language, 30,000 words. Thai has 3,000 words. Now we're asking our students these amazing high-level questions, and we want to get their incredible answers. But first of all, we're hoping they know it in their native language. And now we're hoping that they can translate it with the words that they have. But here's the thing. It works really well if both languages have the words. So I'm going to use the term majestic. I wish I had a better example. This is my example that I say at all of my workshops. I'm going to use the word majestic. Majestic's in Spanish, it's not in Tagalog. So when I say majestic, as a native English speaker, I have a concept of what majestic means. I could probably give you a pretty good definition, but I have an idea, a concept. So when I say majestic, if you're a native-born English speaker, you probably have an idea what I mean. Tagalog does not have the word majestic. So imagine you're a Filipino student coming over, you speak pretty good English because they teach English in the Philippines, and you're an art teacher, and you want the students to use the word majestic. But your Filipino student doesn't have majestic in the language. So he or she's trying to use the best word he or she can use, and so he picks pretty. Now, majestic could mean pretty, but it's not like, apples to apples kind of, if you will, And so a teacher's like, all right, what is this piece of art? And the student goes, pretty. And the teacher's like, oh, you didn't go deep enough with your analysis. Oh, you get a C. And now we're labeling. And so how do we try to adjust it? Because keep in mind, you've got students, it's one thing to just teach the language, we get that. But there's 170,000 words. So we're trying to teach conversation and academic language. But now you're trying to teach majestic, where you can give a definition, but if the student doesn't have it in his or her native language, he or she now has to create a whole new concept of what that word means. That's tough. That's really challenging. And so they'll give you the closest words, and as a teacher, we have to kind of adjust for that. And so I'm going to jump here and then go back, equity and grading. So this is where it's challenging for us as teachers. Because if a student knows what they want to say in their native language, but they can't express it to us, how is that equity in grading? How can we accurately grade these students? When I talked about reading comprehension, actually I'm going to talk about that in a second, so let me hold up on that. So let me go back a little bit just to move forward. Okay, so some questions already raised as that. Now, let's go to personality. So we talked a little bit of language, let's go to personality. You may never get your students' true personalities. I had a Filipino student in my EL class, quietest guy, didn't say a word. And then I saw him at lunch, and he's jumping around singing with his friends. And I'm married to a Filipino, we go to Filipino events all the time. Culturally, that's what a Filipino event represents, is what he's doing outside. Jumping, playing, singing is amazing. And I'm like, that guy's not that guy in my class. I talked to my wife about it. She goes, oh, because in the Philippines, you're taught in school that you don't interrupt the teacher and ask questions. You're taught not to ask questions because it's rude. I'm like, rude? I want my students to ask questions. She goes, great. You didn't grow up in the Philippines. Okay. So, there's a video linking that. If your students act a certain way from a different culture, their cultural expectations, their cultural comfort may not equal what you want it to be in your class. Like they may have been taught culturally what they can and can't do in your classroom. No matter how much you say, speak up, they're influenced by culture and reinforced at home. In the Philippines, I'm not making this up. In the Philippines, I've been to the Philippines many times. I tend to be seen as the bad mood guy. And I'm not. But when I go to the remote province where my family members don't speak English, before my daughter was there to entertain me, I didn't do anything. I sat and let my wife hang out with her family for a couple weeks, and I just sat there. I couldn't communicate. So it was like I'm the bad mood guy because I had no way to communicate. And so I'm just sitting there. And now that I have a daughter, like we play, we have fun, but it's different. But the thing is, they see me as the bad mood guy. Now they don't because they see how I interact with my daughter. But I couldn't I have a different culture, right? Different language. So my wife, I'm not making this up. She is the sweetest person in the U.S. She's probably going to watch this on this video because it's right here. I'm going to edit this part out. She's the sweetest person in the U.S. When she goes to the Philippines, she changes. Night and day. Because in the Philippines, she's the, I don't want to say the head of the family, but she's the responsible one. She's the one that sets everything up. She's the one that gets everything in line. She's like, I don't want to say the leader of the family because that's not accurate, but she's different. She takes on that role. And she plays it out. You know how, we're for those of you who are teachers, we're teachers, right? But we don't want to be teachers at home. Can you imagine, you want to be mom and dad or husband and wife. You can't come home and be like, hello, hey, sit down, do this. No, because that's not our roles. So, but she's in the Philippines, she takes on that role night and day. The point is, it's culture, it's different. And so, our students, we may not get our students' true personality because they may act differently with us than they do, around their other people for their own culture or within their own language and so on. So please don't feel offended if your students aren't giving you their true personalities. I want to make sure I'm not skipping this, and I'm skipping it around. I want to make sure that I'm not leaving anything out. Okay, so that being said, inferred versus literal comprehension. As teachers, we want to try to be as literal as possible, except for when we're teaching metaphors and idiomatic expressions. What I mean is, it's easy for us to go, hey, is it okay to speak when others are speaking? And our ELD students are like, is it? I don't know. Because I'm asking an inferred question. Is that appropriate? And they're like, are you asking me? Or I don't know what this is. Versus literal. Hey, do me a favor, don't talk when I'm talking. Okay. Because that is now something they can memorize. That's a phrase they can memorize. So please try to, as a teacher, try to use literal phrases rather than inferred phrases. Are we living in a barn? Some of you know where that comes from. They're like, what? Shut the door. Why didn't you tell me to shut the door? Why didn't you ask me nicely to shut the door, teacher? And so please be aware of that. Try to limit idiomatic uses of expressions and metaphors. Okay, so some of you may have experienced this. Anyone take the CBEST test? CBEST? Okay, all right, you may have had this too. So my wife, the first time she took it, I think there was one question she didn't get. It was an idiomatic expression question. There were 3 idioms on it. Now I remember it. I'm like, why are we doing idiomatic expressions? She speaks English fluently. The idioms are different from the U.S. and the Philippines. And so please keep in mind, try not to use too much idiomatic expressions and metaphors and sarcasm unless you're trying to teach that explicitly. So just be aware. That's a personality thing. You're like, I'm always sarcastic. Okay, just be aware. It might come across differently for students, especially on multilingual learners, especially if the culture doesn't line up. So let's go back to equity and grading. This is something that I had to learn this by experience as a teacher, and this is something that if teachers would truly understand this, could get on the same wavelength as I am, I think it would make grading so much better for our students and create less frustration. So, as a teacher, if I ask my students a question, and I'm listening for what I want, the ideas that I want, knowing that they don't all have the language, knowing that they may know the answer, but not have the way to express it, I'm listening for some key words. And there are times when I go, look, you didn't tell me exactly what I was hoping to hear, but I think you know what you're talking about. So I'm going to give you every opportunity to have the A, especially in science class. Right? If you have someone who's really good in Spanish at science, but expressing it in English might be challenging, as a teacher we go, okay, yeah, I kind of get the idea, yeah, grade based on intent. The intent is there. Right? I think you know what you're talking about. Teachers should allow the use of translation tools. Big time. So in English, it's model good writing. Like, hey, I want you to be a great writer. I'm going to show you good writing, and I'm going to give you writing, and I'm going to say, use that. Right? Model great writing so that in time you don't have to model writing, you just now are a good writer. So giving as much scaffolding until now you just don't need the scaffolding as much. Using translation tools. I'm presuming all of you do this. But I'm going to quickly go over a couple things real fast. The Google Translate app in the document, it'll transcribe. So you can have your students open the Google Translate app. And okay, I will say, sorry. This is a document with step-by-step instructions. This is a video on how to do it. And I put both in there. So if you want that, you can click both of them. So there's in the Google Translate app, there's a thing called lectures. Or transcribe. Click the transcribe button. The students can put it on the desk, and they can transcribe a lecture that's going on in their native language. It works pretty well. I tested it in my classroom. The first 6 rows are great. The last rows, like, things can be a little twitchy. So maybe have your ELs, multilingual learners, sitting near the front. Yeah, seriously. Or, I'm a big believer in this, pace. If you're a teacher, walk around the room. I didn't mention this last time. You remember how I mentioned like the raising of the hands and making students feel comfortable? Some students don't want to respond no matter what. So that's why when they're working, it's always good to pace. So if you're like me, and I'm a student that never wanted anyone else to know I had a question, I would sit, and when the teacher walked by, I'd be like, hey, sir, can I ask you a question? And some of you might be like that. So when you're a teacher, it's always good to pace around the classroom, rather than sitting at the front when people are working, so that the student that didn't want to raise their hand can at least, like, when you're near them, can answer a question. That's beside the point. So there's a conversation one. For the teachers that go, I can't communicate with my newcomers. Dude, there's a conversation app in Google Translate. You literally, if you can get over the whole thing of being like, did you turn in your homework? Boop. If you can get over that, this is cool. Like, you can translate with each other, and it's very easy. The camera will translate handouts. If you give handouts, you put the camera over it, the camera will take a picture and translate it. I forgot how many languages it works on. But this is amazing, because now I can ask my multilingual learner, I don't care what level they are. 1, 2, 3 doesn't matter to me. Hey, that rhymed. I didn't mean it to. Sorry. That was funnier in my head than I guess it was. It could be out. But anyway, so if I'm a science teacher, which I'm not, so sorry science teachers, I'm going to screw this up. But I'm like, hey, explain how mitosis can impact photosynthesis. And then so now my Spanish speaker, if they truly know the answer, can speak it in their translate, their document, or their phone, and then handwrite it out. Or, better yet, they can voice to text in Google Docs. There's a document on how to do it, there's a video how to do it. So you literally open up the microphone, put what language you want, speak the native language, speak your response in your native language, and then translate it all to English. Now it's grading for equity. Because now my students have every opportunity to get the A, to earn the A. I think that's huge. Does it take a little extra effort for teachers to learn how to do it? Yeah, maybe, I don't know, 15 minutes. So, but we want to break that pattern. I talked earlier how we like patterns, it makes us feel good. Break that pattern and to create a new pattern. Create a new pattern. Dude, if you want to like do something, do it for 2 weeks, now your brain has a new pattern. That's essentially the general rule of thumb. Let me go into this story of an 11th grader. Okay, so this is not my student. I read it somewhere, probably in Educator magazine that most of us get in the mail. I don't know. But true story, a girl from Taiwan was straight A student, up to be valedictorian when she graduated high school. Her mother moved to Chicago, brought her to Chicago. The student did not speak any English. Started failing all her classes because she doesn't speak English. She's valedictorian in Taiwan. Gets into a fight because someone makes fun of her accent at school. She fights back with the one word she knows, the B word, calls this girl the B word. There's a fight that happens. Now the 11th grader, who was going to be valedictorian, is now known as one of those students because she's on that handout we get of like dangerous students, right? Her whole trajectory changed because of language. Now, I don't know the end of the story. My guess, because she was going to go be a surgeon too, I should say that. That was her trajectory. My guess is she's still going to do it anyway, because she has that type of determination. It may take a couple years longer. But that's my guess, but I don't know the outcome. But the point is, we have those students. Have you guys seen this picture I put up? Because I kind of like it. Like, I forgot what it was cut out. It was like equality, equity, taking away the barriers. Translation tools definitely take away the barriers, but more importantly, it's the attitude of us as teachers, right, by allowing all this. I've put a link of 200 sentence frames for all levels, for all like math, history, science, or paraeducators, please share this with your teachers. And let your students use it. Like, give it to your students. Here you go. So I want to talk quickly, very quickly, about why reading is so difficult. This is not said enough, and it's very important, I think, for everyone to know why reading is so difficult. I will look at this. I want to show you this real quickly, because in education it's always taught that the reading scores are plummeted. That's not accurate at all. Our reading scores have been consistent pretty much throughout all of education. So you can just see the numbers. It's pretty much straight. There's no peaks and valleys, because reading is so very, very difficult. Now imagine reading, how difficult reading is, and now imagine being a multilingual learner. So 1 in 5 adults are illiterate. Only 12% of adults are proficient readers. 12%. Only a third of all college graduates read at a proficient level. Down 2005, this is the latest they had of the research, or 2003. I wish they had updated one. Over half of all adults read at a 6th grade level. Now, you could say, oh wow, that's so terrible, oh my gosh. Or you can go, well, maybe that's a norm. Maybe that just shows how difficult reading is. Most of us, if you have your readers, it's easy for us to say, oh, reading is so easy, just keep reading. Well, it's not. There's what the numbers tell us. Here's the thing. Reading is not something that we're born with the ability or capability to do. Neuroscientists will say reading is a miracle. Let me show you the science behind it. So, if someone has difficulty reading, it isn't necessarily that it's only an EL thing. It could be a teenage thing as well, or a person thing. Let me show you this. So here's how reading is developed in the brain. So we are born with a very strong language network, unless there's developmental issues. We're born with a very strong visual network. Our brain, literally, I'm not making this up, our brain has to make a baby. The reading network, the language network, and the vision network have to combine to repurpose cells to make what I would call a reading network. That's not, they call it the visual word form area. The language, the reading network, essentially. We have to be able to take what we see, vision network, and the sounds we hear, and the language we know, and connect it, and create this whole new network. Here's the thing. We're not evolving as humans to do that. That has to be done in every single baby. Every single time. Which is why our amazing elementary school teachers, you have students that come in that know how to read, and others that don't. Because it all depends on those first 5 years of how they were developed by their parents. So, if a parent is like, why isn't my son or daughter reading well? Literally, the most accurate answer you can give them is your son isn't reading well because the circuitry between his language system and his visual system isn't very strong. That's the answer. That's it. When people go like, wow, why reading is so tough? We're not born with the ability to read, nor the capability to read. It's completely foreign. It's a miracle that we can read. And neuroscientists will tell you that. We don't talk enough in education. So the reason I say all of that, so we know the reality of reading, the reason I say all of that is when we get our students and we want them, we get their Lexile scores, their star reading scores, any growth that they have, we need to praise. Praise, praise, praise. Rather than, oh, you need to get higher, you need to get to this level and that level. Reading scores. Where do Lexile reading scores come from? So the main question I want to address, you know how like we have the different reading levels, like advanced, proficient, beginner, can't read it all. Those reading levels are created by a panel. A group of people, including from the general public, like a group of educators, but also people from the general public. That's where those levels came from. The levels are created by where we would hope that people are. We expect people to get to. Not by a natural progression of how the brain reads, because reading is not natural. So we're giving levels to something that isn't natural for us to do in the first place. The reason I'm telling you all that is not just, reading is the most powerful thing you can, that's a metaphor. Reading is one of the most powerful things you can do in life. It's amazing, it impacts your brain so much. Please remember how hard it is to do though. And reading success is a progression from birth. Studies are very clear with this. If it starts from the womb, right? If a person's pregnant, start talking to the baby so they can hear those sounds. When the baby's born, hold the baby while you're reading to the baby. So they're connecting a wonderful memory with holding a book. So when they now read, they're getting that memory of being with mom and dad when they were an infant. They're reading. That's why the behavior part, the psychology part of reading. Reading is more beneficial. People will read better if they're in a family who speaks to the children more and speaks to them more positively. I've got links to all the research if you need it. If a person's in a household where they're talking to the baby, how was your day? Oh my gosh. And they're listening to babble and they're like, so the kid's talking more. And always like, you work so hard, positive reaffirming, they're better readers. If someone's in a household where it's like, go in your room, go sit in the corner, don't talk to me right now. In that, they're speaking fewer words and they don't have the confidence to start speaking out and articulating and analyzing and letting their feelings be known, they're worse readers. So it's not just hey, just read more. That's not how it works. Phonics is amazing. It's not just phonics though. There's a whole combination of things. There's the behavioral, there's the neuroscience part with it. This is my cheap plug, I did a 2-year research project researching the real science of reading. If you ever have trouble sleeping, I linked it here. Here you go. You can watch that in bits and pieces because that's probably only how much you can handle it. My point to telling you all of this is reading is part neuroscience, establishing that circuitry, part emotional and environmental, a lot of interest. If you're like my friend who had no support reading, but he just wanted to learn how to read, he was curious, and he read everything, there you go. We have to spark that interest. And we think of like, what are our multilingual learners, what kind of books are we giving them to read? And like, maybe it's not the most exciting. And it's easy to be like, well, I let them choose their own books. It'd be like someone with no nutritional value, like no fitness and nutrition, knowledge, putting them in a grocery store. Hey, choose your own healthy food. Can I get some guidance, right? So there's that combination. There's no like one easy answer. I also did a video on where Lexile got their Lexile levels from. I just called Lexile and asked them. And I had a video on like Lexile explained. If you're a coach, watch these videos. You can teach workshops on this stuff now. And again, it's not so simple as like you need. Now in our district, our students, EL students have to hit a certain reading level for them to reclassify. But again, we're the ones putting that number there. Right? It's kind of arbitrary. It's kind of a standard number. The brain it's not like you reach this and you like succeeded. The thing with reading, it's a progression. Praise indie growth. And it's not an end goal. It's not a finish line. I would not, people say like, well, you have to have like a 1400 reading level before you become a doctor. I knew no neuroscience vocabulary at all until I started reading of neuroscience textbooks. Right? Whatever you are in, that's going to give you the vocabulary to succeed. So please don't judge yourself or others based on their reading levels. Support, guide, on the journey, right? Guide them on the journey. So going back, knowing all that, because academic tests are based on reading and writing, we may not get an accurate indicator of what our multilingual learners actually know. And that's tough, because I want to know what my students know. I want to know their personality. I want to guide them onto their journey. But oftentimes I can't. And if they don't do well on a test that isn't written in a language that's accessible to them, they're put in classes that maybe they don't thrive in, or they're not the most exciting. Now that's not an us thing. That's an institutional thing. But what we can do is support that and keep that in the back of our mind. Skip that. Final thoughts, I already told you that. Multilinguals, please teach your multilinguals like everyone else. Please make the information as accessible as possible. Please be careful of biases and prejudices and labels that we put on our students. Communicate with your kids. If you're a parent and they want to know why, you're a student. Be real with your students. My students would come to me and ask me questions about school. Hey, I heard this is going on. Is it true? And I would tell them the truth, but I would also tell them this. I'm sorry, I can't tell you. I want to, but I can't. I'm just not. I'll be real with them. Or, I really don't know. I'm guessing this, but I don't really know. Like, be real, be open, be honest. But communicate with your kids and your students. Please understand when it comes to reading, reading is tough. Praise, praise, praise. Any growth. If your students come to you with a 700 reading score and leave with you with a 900, that's amazing. We really don't understand how hard reading is. It really is so challenging on our brain. I wanted to, so here's the QR code. Please email me if you have any questions. If you want to just talk, I'm very open and accessible. If you just want to just talk, I'm good. If you want resources, I don't spam. It's not that type of a list. It's like I'm a coach doing all this work, your coach is doing all this work, your parents, your teachers. Let's just share the work. Feel free to get on my resource list. There's my YouTube channel. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. I'll get out of your way. I know you're not.